So we try and avoid spraying whenever possible. There are two natural mechanisms that help with the control of the species that have persisted in the soil for decades now. First is a virus that causes a change in behavior in the caterpillar. They start to like seek out high places, and you'll see that they bend over into like a V shape as they are seeking these high places, and they burst open and spread the virus that way. Kind of a gruesome way to go. But this builds up in the population over time, completely a natural thing for them. And it'll build up and build up and build up until there's kind of a pandemic, almost just a huge spread of the virus throughout the population, causing a population crash. The fungus operates in a similar manner. They have to ingest the fungus to actually become infected. But they'll crawl around and it'll grow inside of them until they burst. And then you'll find these sort of liquefied carcasses on the edge of the trees where they have been trying to find a way to eat and maintain their bodies, and it'll spread amongst the population as they burst and let spores out.
And this fungus is created naturally from warmer springs and more moisture?
Yes, both of the natural mechanisms need plenty of moisture to spread because they spread in similar manners. The virus has its I don't know what a single virus thing is called, but those spread by water. The fungal spores also are transported by water and are able to be prolific in these wet, moist and humid environments. In dry seasons, you have less spread of that and less connection between the insects and those natural mechanisms, so it tends to slow down its pace throughout the population.
And what about that parasitic wasp?
Yeah, there are some parasitoids. Those lay their eggs inside the eggs of the spongy moth caterpillars. So those you wouldn't even see the caterpillars if those are effective. They would hatch out into these almost microscopic parasitoid wasps. I haven't seen studies on their efficacy yet, but I'm sure if they're effective, we'll definitely see something about that soon. Yes?
So, a few years ago, there was a firm in the area that was selling parasitoid wasps,
Mm-hmm.
egg masses, posted in the news. I don't know if they're still in business. Biosolutions or something like that.
Was that in Allegan?
Yeah,
Sam DeFazio?
I don't know the name.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
he
the other
was
question
doing
I had
that.
was with respect to the fungus and the virus. Are any inoculi available to encourage that natural process?
Right. Okay. So the first question was about if that person is in business still. Yeah. So the parasitic wasps, I don't think they're widespread in Michigan yet. They would have to be applied locally because I don't think they survive in Michigan winters. So they have to be basically provided every time that you want to inoculate spongy moth. The second question was about can you purchase like this fungus or virus to inoculate your soils and provide an additional benefit. You can purchase them, but it may not be necessary. The fungus survives in the soil for up to 7 years in direct sunlight, so it's robust. The virus, I think, is able to survive in the soil for 3 to 4 years. That one I'll have to check. But normally, in normal conditions, you would not have to reintroduce that to the soil, because even if it's not on your property, neighbors have it, it's in the state game area, it's everywhere around you, so it would find its way back into your soils naturally.
Thinking rather to encourage it, because yeah, I've got the virus, I've got the fungus,
Oh, okay,
but
yeah,
it's not doing anything near population control.
right.
That's what I was thinking.
Right. I don't think adding more would encourage that, unless you just had, I guess, just the raw fungus that just sitting out, waiting to spread its spores. I don't think it would have a increased effect just adding more to the soil, if that makes sense. So when we think about what treatment to use, we have to think about the risk, the additional risks that are involved. Most of the time this comes up at the township or county level, where they're trying to think of what to do on a large scale, or if there's anything that can be done on that sort of scale. So the map itself shows the outbreaks in 2020 in northern Michigan. There are still some data that was missing for southern Michigan, so I know that it's been around here around 2020 as well. But you can see around the Cadillac area and up at the just south of Presque Isle, Montmorency County, they had quite bad infestations. So that's something where they can consider doing something to help the population get under control, or it may be at a level where it's at the peak of its population and will be crashing soon. So that's where a lot of the risk management comes in. The spongy moth itself has a cycle of outbreak that's about 5 to 7 years long, where it just builds up in population over those 5 to 7 years and then abruptly crashes, usually due to those natural control mechanisms that have finally built up in the population and spread wildly. The cost of doing like an aerial spray versus doing these sort of holistic like egg scraping and burlap banding on the trees is astronomical in the difference. Getting a private like a helicopter service or aerial service to spray just your property can be out of cannot be feasible for some people. It's just not in the cards. Whereas on a township level, you can split that across the residents of the township and make it a lot easier to bear.
But that wipes out your monarchs and a lot of other.
It has the potential to, yeah. It has the potential to affect non-target species. So if you time it right, it doesn't have that much of an effect on non-target species, but the spray itself is a insecticide that affects butterflies and moths. It's very specific to butterflies and moths, but it affects all kinds. So spongy moth is at a level, it hatches early enough that a lot of the species that could be affected as well haven't hatched yet, except for monarchs and a few others. So that's where the additional risk comes from to other species.
So the spraying is done early April?
Yep, you want to get it onto the leaves before the larvae start feeding, so that when they eat on the leaves, they're ingesting the insecticide and die. There's some examples of local communities that have done this, and it kind of gives an idea of what the cost is on this sort of level of management. The Ada Township, that's what I put on here, right? Yeah, Ada Township partnered with Hamilton Helicopters, which is an aerial service that operates out of Hamilton, and they have a pesticide applicator's license, all sorts of different licenses to apply these chemicals as they're flying over people's property. And for the little bit under 3,000 acres that were treated, it cost $200,000. So it was funded by special assessment to Ada Township. Everyone in that community voted on and agreed to pay the money that was needed to do this for Ada Township. And they're considering doing follow-up treatments in the future with those sort of special assessments. So that's kind of an idea of what work goes into doing large-scale treatments, at least with chemicals. Yes?
But do they have any natural enemies, like birds eat the larvae or anything?
They will, but not in the levels that would be needed to control the population. Because they're not native to Michigan, most other species that are native to Michigan don't recognize them as food. So if they don't see them and be like, oh, I know what that kind of caterpillar is, they won't eat them. So this is for most species of birds. A lot of generalist birds, like robins, blue jays, things like that, they'll eat them. But again, not in the levels that would control the population. The main problem with invasive species is that they don't have natural predators and they don't have a lot of natural control mechanisms that keep them in check like they do in their home environment. So that is a good question of like, why are they so bad? Why don't the birds take care of them? Because they're not from here. Not a lot of things recognize them as food, and they don't have natural predators unless they're brought in with them.
What would be wherever they came from? I don't know if where they did originally come from. But
Yeah, they came in
had
from
natural,
Southeast Asia.
and they had a natural predator there.
Yep.
Why is it we can't have that brought in too?
Yeah. So that is a good question, because this is something that has been done for other invasive species over time, and it's called classical biological control, where you have one invasive species that's come in, so you bring a different exotic species that's a predator from that old environment to control it. It has worked in some cases, but it's failed dramatically in other cases where it starts hunting native insects or other species as well. So a predator that comes in without any natural enemies and a whole lot of food in front of it that doesn't recognize it as a predator can cause a lot of problems. So that's why parasitoid wasps are used so often, is because they're very specialized. So parasitoid wasps of spongy moth caterpillars will only lay eggs in spongy moth eggs. So they know exactly what they're doing, what their reproductive cycle is. So they're very low risk for spreading out into the environment. Whereas, say we brought in a bird from Southeast Asia and it starts growing like crazy because it has not just the spongy moth caterpillars to eat, but it has all of our native caterpillars to eat as well. So that's the kind of reasoning behind why we don't do classical biological control as much. Let's see. Yeah, cover that. So what helps us weigh out these options and weigh out the risk of what we can do on your property? Surveying egg masses. It's a great way to see what you actually have on your property. And we'll be following a protocol from Penn State that shows like, okay, we want to look at a 40th acre plot, and we'll see how many egg sacs are covering that 40th of an acre, and multiply the results by 40 to see how many egg sacs per acre that we have. Now, for this exercise, we'll just be doing a few plots as a demonstration, but for larger properties, you may have to do quite a few 40th acre plots to get an accurate sample of what's on your property. What can be done for operating on a larger scale is having volunteers or like citizen science work on reporting where egg sacs are and in what amounts. This is more helpful on like a township or a higher scale. For your own properties where you have 40, 50, 60 acres, just taking a walk in the woods and taking samples can be good enough, or getting the kids to go out and do it. That can be a fun exercise to do during the spring.